this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because, as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to another episode of The End Game. I'm here with my co-host Herman Bowles, and we have a very special guest, Bill Yeoman Jr., son of Bill Yeoman Sr., who coached with Duffy Daugherty, and then when he became a head coach at Houston, desegregated Houston's program in 1964. It's a long time ago and far before all these Alabama myths. Um, I have a chapter on Houston and their impact on college football in my new book, The Right Thing to Do. And Bill gave me lots of great insight along with Elmo Wright, an All American from Houston. Bill's dad played for Red Blake at West Point. He coached with Duffy Daugherty in the 50s until he took over at Houston in 1961. Bill Yeoman Sr. lifted Houston from a minor program into full membership and winning Southwest Conference titles. And he was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. And but before I go any further, let me introduce Herman Bowles, my co-host. Herman is a pioneer himself as the first black quarterback at his high school in Alabama in 1973. He went to West Point when there were very few black recruits, cadets, and graduated, was a retired colonel and one of the top businessmen at JLL in Washington, D.C. Herman, how are you doing?
I'm hanging in there, Bill. It was a good weekend for me. I had a couple of speeches last week, and I out in New York and at USC, actually in Ojai, California, for the USC Lusk Center. Then the most important thing was visiting some clients in Dallas, and I got to see my new grandson again.
Yeah, I saw some of those pictures. That was great.
Justin. So hopefully he'll be West Point class of like 2040 something, I guess.
All right, Bill, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. And
good to be here.
Yeah, tell us first of all, start out telling us about joining the podcast and talking about with the chance to talk about your father's career and the family connection with Duffy Daugherty.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. In this section of the country, Dad is extremely and well respected, but not liked that much because of the integration situation. Now, as time goes on, obviously, that bitterness wanes over time, but he was no friend of the South. There were a lot of people that respected what he accomplished, but they weren't real thrilled about it. So I enjoy talking about all the things that he did do because I knew the struggles behind the scenes that made what seemed easy not that easy, and in fact pretty difficult and stressful. So I appreciate the opportunity to give him the accolades that he absolutely deserves.
Good. And Herman, before I ask you to comment, I want to make the comment that one of the things that was great about the Houston chapter and the Oklahoma chapter with Chuck Fairbanks Jr., his dad was the coach at Oklahoma with Barry Switzer. Barry was his offensive coordinator, and Chuck played at Michigan State for Duffy Daugherty. Both Bill Jr. and Chuck Jr. were so close to their fathers that quoting them, I almost felt like I was quoting their dad. So that made those chapters extra special. And I did not have a good father, good relationship with my father. And then Herman, father was killed in a highway truck accident when his mother was still pregnant with him. Herman, I'd like
Wow.
you to talk about that special connection that Bill has with his father, and he's able to tell us about such an interesting chapter in the integration of college football.
Well, first of all, Bill, welcome to the show again. And yeah, your father, the connection with me, obviously, is West Point.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, I can remember when he had the job at Houston and actually played us once and beat us. That
Well,
was
that's true. We did once. Yeah.
Yep. And I'm certain you have hopefully some connectivity and memory of West Point as well, because it's a great institution. I'm very proud of it. You can see from the rug behind me. I hope you recognize that crest.
I do. Oh, I have a great connection with West Point. We went there as often as we could. Dad loved West Point. He loved his relationships with his classmates, and they were a variety. Ed White was his roommate one semester. He was the first guy to walk in space. He got to tackle Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis without a face mask, which makes it pretty believable that when I tell you my dad was a tough human being, he was. And back in those days, you got to play. He started on the basketball team, and then the rest of the time was dedicated to football. And that was, you practiced all year round. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is Dad's line coach was Vince Lombardi. And Coach Blake made Vince Lombardi look like a pussycat. So those experiences were something to cherish, but as you're going through them, it's probably something they wish they didn't have to do.
Yeah.
And then after Dad graduated, he spent 2 years on Colonel Blake's staff. And on that staff, there was Murray Walmuth, Vince Lombardi, and Sid Gilman. So, and then we can go on to the staff that Dad worked with under Duffy Daugherty. But Dad was exposed to many people who were major contributors to just football history. So he was very fortunate to have all of those relationships as he was going through his career.
Well, you make.
But he loved West Point. That's the only time he would leave the University of Houston would be to go to West Point. That was a special place for him.
Well, you take your comments about playing under Vince Lombardi and Earl Blake, saying it looked better in the rearview mirror and you appreciate it. That sounds just like Army Ranger School.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, I did the. You are so correct. Yeah.
Are you a Ranger, Bill?
Oh no. I went to the Air Force Academy and broke my back in the first year.
Okay.
Which was the second time I did that at high school. So I finished at the University of Houston.
Just think what would have happened if you had gone to West Point. Oh my God.
Well, and I was recruited to go to West Point, but Colonel Dealens was the athletic director, and he was one of Dad's teammates, and I was able or forced, take your pick, to watch all of Dad's films. And the secretary that worked for Colonel Blake was Colonel Dealens' secretary, and many of Dad's classmates happened to be professors at the time. So clearly I was not the athlete that Dad was. So the pressure was something I didn't want to be compared to all that he did. So I went to the Air Force Academy and didn't survive long, but it was a good experience.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, to answer your question, it just brings great feelings to me, hearing about the relationship Bill Jr. had with Bill Sr. And Bill, as Tom mentioned, I never knew my dad. However, I have been so fortunate that I have 3 sons. And when you go through this period, my mom was a single mom for the majority of my childhood. And I can recall going to practices even at Little League, and you would see the dads out with their sons after practice doing things. And it was this, these little, I didn't know what the other side would have been like per se, but those were things I said, oh my gosh, I would long to have somebody out here, because my mom had to work, right? And I bummed her
Yes,
out.
absolutely.
Things.
Yeah.
However, when I became a dad, and I'm a dad, as I said, of 3 sons, I coached all of them at one point. And I think those of us who have not had a father in our lives, we have the romanticism of what that fatherhood should be like. And I think I contributed very, very positively along with my recently passed wife in the parenting process. And Bill, for your information, 2 of my kids actually went to West Point and graduated. One played lacrosse for 2 years, but my younger son, Jonathan Herman Jr., played lacrosse. He's in the Army now out in Chicago. He's an airborne ranger, 3-time combat veteran. Makes me so proud. And he's the father of 2 boys and a girl. And then Jonathan, who played football all 4 years at West Point, he just became a father in February. Matter of fact, his son is 4 months old yesterday, and I had the privilege of visiting them last week, as I mentioned earlier. And being a father and then watching them become a father, it's just such a great, great, great feeling. So I understand it. I'm envious that I didn't have it, the first derivative of that, of having a father. However, the second and third derivatives I'm seeing are very, very, very impressive and touching. Tom, I think this is a good time for us to congratulate the Florida Panthers on their winning the Stanley Cup last night. And I think one of the things that's important about that is obviously the owner of the team is Vinny Viola, and Vinny was a cadet while I was there. And then the other thing about it is that 4 of his senior individuals on the team are also West Point graduates, to include his president. And
Wow, that's
operating
amazing.
officer. So
yeah. For hockey, you don't hear that.
Congratulations. Yeah. I actually watched a hockey game last night in order to support Vinny and the Florida Panthers. And again, last year, I want to get away, the finals consisted of the Vegas Knights and the Florida Panthers. And of course, both of those teams, Bill Anderson, are owned by West Point graduates. So
wow,
West Point's making its way in hockey as owners.
Wow. Yeah, one real quick Vince Lombardi story, then we'll move on. When he was on the staff, one of his jobs for Red Blake, and this shows you how primitive technology was back in those days, he would take the game film from Saturday down to a place in New York early Sunday morning, have it developed, and then on the way back, he was under instructions to watch the film with General MacArthur. At the
there you go, yeah,
at his hotel there, the famous hotel there. I'm drawing a blank on it. And
Hotel Thayer?
No, that's not that.
In New York?
Yeah, in New York, yeah. But anyways, then he would bring the film back up, and the coaches would get to work. But anyways, one of the important things about having Bill Yeoman Jr. on our show today is Bill Yeoman Sr. was on Duffy Daugherty's first staff in 1954. And this is a 70th anniversary of that first staff. And college football lore doesn't understand this. Even my own school doesn't quite get it. But I write about it thoroughly in The Right Thing to Do. That on that staff was Dan Devine, College Football Hall of Fame, Arizona State, Missouri, Notre Dame. Bob Devaney, College Football Hall of Fame, Wyoming and Nebraska. Bill Yeoman Sr., College Football Hall of Fame, Houston. Sonny Grandelius, who was at Colorado, and like the other guys, the other assistant coaches, they all followed Duffy's blueprint of recruiting more than the unwritten quota of a half dozen black players. In other words, they recruited more black players than they inherited on their roster. And then three other coaches associated with that era were Frank Cush, who succeeded Dan Devine, Chuck Fairbanks, who played for Duffy and was the head coach at Oklahoma when Barry Switzer was his offensive coordinator, and then Earl Edwards, desegregated NC State. Bill, talk about your respect for Duffy and Duffy's influence on him and how he carried that over to desegregating Houston's program.
Well, Duffy was an extremely special person to Dad. It went way beyond being the boss. They were lifelong friends up until the day Duffy died. They would meet every summer, and Dad's respect for how Duffy handled people, whether it was football players, the public, or parents, was what he admired most about Duffy. I think Dad was probably better at X's and O's, but no one handled people better than Duffy. I happened to be at the GM Tower with Dad, and we were just over there on a recruiting trip, and Dad used to take, for some reason, my brother and I all over the place, and that was probably just to get us out of Mom's hair. But we were in the GM lobby, and the young lady said, well, you can't go up there now because they're having a board meeting. And Duffy just said, well, just tell so-and-so that Duffy Daugherty's in the lobby. And everything just stopped when that message reached the top. And they said, get on up here, because Duffy every time was a show. He was entertainment for free. And there wasn't anyone better than Duffy at handling people. Just a phenomenal individual and extremely, extremely competitive. Now, how that equated to desegregating the South with regard to Dad, I don't know. Dad was intense. I remember in his later years, I took care of him for 5 years, and he had bladder cancer, so I had to empty the bag every 2.5 hours, and that's 24/7. So obviously I had to take his car away. So he called the police because I stole his car. You know, he would be out in the parking lot in his underwear looking for his damn car. And but the point is, he wanted to win. And you were not going to win in the state of Texas being able to recruit only half the people that were available to play college football. So after the 62 season and 63, 62 was very successful, 63 not so good, and Dad just was frustrated because I can't get the best players. I can't even talk to the best players. So he just went into Harry Falk, who was the athletic director at the time, and said, I'm recruiting everybody. And he said, that means black, Hispanic, white. And then he just left the office. And Harry, probably after the door was shut, said, okay. And that opened the door for Guy Lewis to recruit Elvin Hayes and Don Chaney, who were the two first there. But Dad just wanted to win, and you win by being able to recruit the best players. And more than half of the best players happened to be not white. So he just said, I'm going after the best players. And he wasn't naive about what was going on in the South at the time. He had a meeting with the black leaders in Houston at the Antioch Baptist Church, and one of the questions that was asked of Dad, because I happened to be there, was, are you prejudiced? He said, you're damn right. I am prejudiced against bad football players. and so after that, he started, his first recruit obviously was Warren McVeigh. Because like Jackie Robinson or anybody else, you have to get the right person to cross that line. And Warren was the right person. He was either naive enough or brave enough to become the first. And he is responsible, along with Dad, for integrating major college sports in the South. And there are lots of stories. In fact, I just got off the phone 2 hours before coming on with the two of you to Bo Burris, who was the first quarterback in the triple option. And I happened to see an interview that Joe Buck had with Joe Namath yesterday, which is an interesting interview. And Bo gave me some insights. In the Ole Miss game, for instance, Warren was the first black person on a football field in the state of Mississippi. And he received, he received many death threats. And the game ended 14-13 in favor of Ole Miss. But the interesting thing was, Warren imparted to me, he was scared because there was really no one there that was going to help defend him if violence took place. And the police officers in the tunnel made that perfectly clear. So he broke on a run, which was going to be a 50-yard sprint to the end zone. And he said, well, I was too in the open. So he just fell down because he had to have, in his mind, people around him so people wouldn't fire their guns at him. So that was one touchdown that didn't happen. But in the tunnel, the officer said, if things start to happen, we're not going to help you. And Dad obviously said, you certainly don't have to go out there if you don't want to. But to his credit, he went out there every time. And back in those days, we were an unofficial member of the SEC. Every year we played Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Memphis State, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Miami, Tennessee. It was like we were in the SEC. So Warren broke the color barrier in each of those states and each of those schools. So he is to be beyond commended for the courage he showed to do that, because this is the same time when James Meredith was getting into Ole Miss, and the Supreme Court of the United States suggested that James Meredith had to be admitted to Ole Miss, and the state of Mississippi ignored that. And it wasn't until Bobby Kennedy sent down the militia that happened. So this is the era in which we are dealing. The Namath, interestingly, said when he went to Alabama, his two best friends in Pennsylvania happened to be black, and he put their pictures on his wall. And Joe was called the N-word. It was Joe the N-word, not Joe Namath. So this is how hostile the South was at the time all of this happened. And you can see, this is why I'm extremely proud of Dad, not so much for the triple option, which is a great accomplishment in itself, but you look at the SEC now, there are black and white players on the benches because of him and Warren McVay. He's the one that made the issue not an issue. Because if you wanted to win, then you had to recruit all the athletes, not just the ones you wanted. So,
Herman, your thoughts?
I'm finished with that.
Well, look, diversity, as I always say, is good for the world, and it's definitely good for America. And I think we've definitely proved that it's good for college football. And
Absolutely.
yeah, what your dad did, in football, in all sports, but football in particular, it's really about learning about life, right?
Absolutely.
You have to keep going. You win big, you need to show humility. You've got a meritocracy, and that you've got to compete for your position every week. And if we instill those qualities into people, we're going to have a better nation. And just sitting here, Bill, when you talked about him being on the breakaway run and the fact that he fell down for fearing for his life, it just made chills come over my body, just how awful that is. And
exactly,
everyone can just internalize, what Martin Luther King says, that, he had a dream when we could all walk together hand in hand and get things done. And fortunately, we've made progress. Unfortunately, we're not totally there yet. However,
we're not. I agree with that. Yeah.
People like your dad had the foresight and, wanted to win and wanted to get the best people on the field.
Dad wanted the best, and another example of that is he hired the first black assistant coach in the South.
That's
so
right.
He didn't hire him because he was black. Coach Red was one of the best coaches in the state of Texas high school ranks. And it took a lot to get Coach Red to leave Lufkin Dunbar to be Dad's backfield coach. And because he was just a phenomenal coach. He's got things named after him in Houston as well as in Lufkin. And it's a phenomenal family. But Dad wanted him not because he was black and add to the legion of, breaking the color barrier, because Coach Red was one of the best in the state of Texas. And I think Georgia Tech and Houston were the first two schools in the South to have black quarterbacks. And Dad didn't have a black quarterback because he wanted to be the first to have a black quarterback. It's because that quarterback happened to be the best there was, and that's why he started, not because of his color. So,
Yeah, and if you people go back to our previous episode 24 on SMU football, Rufus Cormier, who was a original black player at SMU, followed Jerry Levias by 1 year at both Hebert High in Beaumont, Texas, and at SMU. And Rufus talked about how when there was a credible death threat in the TCU SMU game, and the FBI deemed it credible, and they escorted Jerry Levias to and from the bus to the locker room, and they were positioned around the stadium looking for a sniper. That was the fear, that if Jerry Levias broke off a run or a long catch, that he would be shot. And I want to bring this up. It's important to hear both of these stories so soon connected to what Reggie Jackson had to say at the recent baseball game at Rickwood Field in Birmingham, because it went viral. And I was just kind of stunned that people thought that this was something new. This is stories that were told throughout the South, and they're told throughout my book, The Right Thing to Do. And we've kind of forgotten how tough of a road it was to get through the 1960s. And that's what I'm proudest about my book, The Right Thing to Do, is that I'm telling stories that need to be retold, and in many places haven't been told in the first place at all. And Herman, I'd like you to comment also. Gary Steele was the first black football letterman at West Point in 1966, and he recruited you. And although this is the fall of 74, there weren't that many black cadets in those days. I mean, talk about the challenges you faced and how you can relate to the other pioneers that came ahead of you in the South.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm grateful for Gary Still and everything that he did for not only Army football, but for our nation. As a retired colonel, he went on to serve gallantly for our country. And, in terms of West Point, I came from the South, where there's no doubt that I saw implicit and explicit racism in many ways. And much of it, I probably didn't even appreciate until after the fact, that I learned of unconscious bias that people do. You learn about a thing called microaggression. And that's when people do things like, if you see a black person walking down the street, you walk over to the other side. I mean, that's microaggression, because you're assuming the worst case every time. And I can tell you overall, Tom, at West Point, there was probably only one time that I consciously thought that I was being discriminated about. And Bill, you're certainly aware of Beast Barracks and what you go through there, where it's to be the most enjoyable and the hardest summer of your life. And everybody was challenged, because in that training, the whole idea is to take these hot flying young men, and now young men and women who have been everything and have been successful at everything they've done, to let them see some adversity, because you can't do anything like they say, step up to my line, you didn't step close enough. If you stepped on the line, you stepped too close. And it's just one of those things that's a teaching. And overall, I would say that the Academy, West Point in this instance, was truly a meritocracy. And I owe much of the success that I've had this far, to many of the lessons and experiences that I learned at West Point. We already talked about Ranger School, learning that your limits are further than you think they are, and that plebe year probably brought that to pass. So the Army, certainly, I'm certain, is not perfect, or the military is not perfect. However, it is a meritocracy, because you think in the end, what we're training men and women to do is be in the foxhole next to someone that they have to depend on, because it's not about losing a game or losing the conference. It's about losing your life and protecting the freedom that we sometimes take for granted here in the United States. However, there has to be, and less than 1% of us are out there doing it, protecting it for everyone.
Yeah, and it's pretty well accepted that the military is now probably the most diverse institution in American society. Bill Elmo Wright was just so great. He gave me so much great information about
He probably gave you 3 hours worth.
about playing for Houston, playing for your dad. And one of the things he said that he didn't realize until later in life, he didn't have any racial problems with his teammates. And he realized later in life that that was probably a credit to your dad, that he was only recruiting good people. He wasn't going to let a bigot on that roster. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's correct. When Dad made rules, the rules were the rules. And as an example, one of the rules was everybody's in bed at 11 on weekdays. And Royce Berry happened to be one of those that was testing the rules. He was an All-American defensive end and went on to start for the Cincinnati Bengals and was their captain for 8 years. But he missed bed check, and he was off the team for the rest of the year. So everybody understood that they were all in that together, and the rules were the rules. And if you broke them, regardless of who you were going to suffer the consequences. Now, initially, and I was talking to Bo Burris again earlier today, and when Warren came in, he said there were some white players that left the team. And he said, your dad said, good, we don't want those people, because they're not going to be team members. They're going to be cancers on what it is we're trying to do. So, well, it's a long story, but Tom Wilson, who was one of the greatest trainers known to man, was a lot like a Red Blake on the team. We had something called Camp Fun, which is like Beast Barracks. It was designed to get you in shape, get you tough, and get you gone if you couldn't be tough. So everybody was treated exactly the same. And Dad really wouldn't have it any other way.
And Herman,
Go ahead.
Herman, you're a retired colonel, executive, leading a lot of people. Talk about establishing leadership like that and how some coaches can do it and some can't.
Well, leadership is the ability, in my simple terms, to motivate a group to accomplish a common goal, right? And you can lead by fear, you can lead by admiration, you can lead by example. And, you think of some of the, great coaches who have that ability to not only challenge you, however, inspire you at the same time. Because the concept of winning is important. However, the concept of winning at all costs, we've got to make sure that we continue to have integrity and thoughtfulness and, consideration for others in the process. Now, a line coach would tell me to go to hell talking about considerations for others in the middle of a game. But I think we understand the bigger picture of life. And it's all, it's about the coaches, I think, that are, the most successful. Obviously, now, in my opinion, coaching, 80, 90% of it is recruiting, right? You got to have the right talent. And if people are recruiting the same, then it comes down to what the scheme is. And Bill, of course, your dad, decided to neutralize. And we're so glad at the academies that he, came up with the wishbone, because that has made the academies be able to compete on par with some of the top programs in the country. And everybody remembers the Oklahoma game and the Michigan game, where by a matter of inches, those would have been some of the greatest upsets in college football. But however, the Poaches overall, and I hope we continue to take this into consideration, these young men and women for the other sports we need to think about. And what I did, use athletics as a means to an end. It's not the end. And if coaches are able to impart that as a life lesson, while still the discipline and the idea of the team, not the individual coming first, those are things that I think have been embedded into me, which have been instrumental in my career.
And
I hope.
go ahead. Go
Go ahead.
Bill.
I totally agree. Dad's one of his recruiting tools was the city of Houston. He said, "Son, most people aren't going to play pro football, and if you want to be in a city where you can succeed, it's going to be the city of Houston after you get a degree from the University of Houston." And that went a long way in helping the recruiting, because there were a lot of people that we were recruiting against that had the benefit of everything. One of those being Texas and Texas A&M and Baylor. I mean, they had everything. So we had not much, but we did have the city of Houston. So you're right. Football is just a reflection of life. And if you learn those lessons, you'll do well in life.
Yeah, and then one of the themes of both my books, Ray of Light and The Right Thing to Do, is that nobody was more important to college football integration than Duffy Daugherty. His fingerprints are coast to coast through his assistant coaches who followed his blueprint of ignoring the unwritten quota that was in place at USC, where they only had 5 black players on their 62 national championship team and only 7 black players on their 67 national championship team. And that one of those key people in that was Bill Yeoman Sr. and what he was doing at Houston. He was playing games throughout the SEC. His black players were on fields throughout the SEC stadium, scoring touchdowns. And all of these events were helping open the doors at these SEC schools so that by the time 1970 rolled around, college football integration was fait accompli. Alabama was the 7th of 10 SEC schools to recruit a black player. 33 of the 37 major Southern programs all had a black player. And this myth about the 1970 USC Alabama game, there was no reporting after the game about how this is changing the South. All that is a myth made up 20 years later. And if we were really to focus in on someone who had a bigger impact on the South than anybody, it's Bill Yeoman. Your thoughts on that, Bill Jr.?
I agree with you. We first integrated, but then we were going to all the places where to make a difference, you're going to have to play in those states and those stadiums. And there were a lot of firsts with Warren McVay, lots. And I'll give you an anecdote. We played Georgia, and Paul Gibson was the major running back at the time. And they said it would be wise for us to be 200 miles from Athens, staying in a hotel there because of the climate. We went into Athens, beat them, and Paul Gibson scored 3 or 4 touchdowns and gained 225 yards. And the bus went back to the hotel because you just can't get a direct flight anywhere out of Athens. And almost 200 to 300 people from Athens came out to congratulate Paul for how well he took it to the Bulldogs. So you could see the people had an appreciation for someone who did quality work, regardless of their color. So that was the nice thing for me is I saw the absolute worst and I saw the absolute best.
Yeah. And Elmo Wright spoke about that. He was a few years behind Warren, so progress had been made. And Elmo
Correct.
felt as when he went throughout the SEC stadiums, that the black players were well received. And he talked about the time he got hurt. I forget which stadium it was at. I think it was at Mississippi, actually. And they had to
Probably.
put him on a stretcher and wheel him out. And he said the crowd cheered for him as he went out. That's a good example of how progress was being made. Both Bill Jr. and Herman, if you could comment on that.
Well,
Go
yeah,
ahead, Herman.
yeah, I'll start. Look, in the end, people like competition, and we like competitors, and we like winners. And I think sports has done has been an important part in kind of bringing our nation together at times. And Bill, we've spoken here when I was in high school, and Tom actually interviewed my high school coach, Buddy Moore, who actually ended up later being a two-star general and adjutant general for the state of Alabama. And the fact that he was chastised somewhat behind the scenes for starting me at quarterback, because the myth obviously was that you're black, so therefore you're not smart, and you cannot play the most important position on the field because you don't know how to think. And I have to attribute so much to him for going against the grain and doing what he thought was best in order to what? Win. Good coaches like to win. They don't give a hoot about the color of your skin or what car you drove to practice. They want to win. And I'm just hopeful that our country, in the divisive place, and we don't talk about politics on here generally, Bill, but the divisive place that we are here, that we can look at athletics to bring us together and see what happens when we have collaboration and teamwork, and we win as a team. And that's the way we're going to win as a nation.
Yeah, and then that brings us to one of your dad's most bittersweet wins, Bill. Um, your dad was trying to schedule tough to build a program, and Duffy Daugherty agreed to play a game that opened the 1967 season. The Spartans, remember, were played Notre Dame in the game of the century to end the 1966 season, and they shared the national title. And so Michigan State opened 1967, ranked number 3. Jimmy Ray was back as a starting quarterback, and Houston's Warren McVay ran wild. Dan Jenkins, in his Sports Illustrated story, called him Wondrous Warren and Where's My Rogaze Thesaurus when I need it to describe this game. Final score was Houston 37-7. Your dad was carried off the field. Wild greeting from Houston fans at Hobby Airport. Tell us all about that, Bill. About how your dad, obviously a great win for him, but he felt bad for Duffy too, right?
Well, it was bittersweet. He so appreciated what Duffy did, and that's allowing us to play him, because Duffy could have very easily and justifiably said no, but he didn't. He gave us a chance. Thank goodness we took advantage of it. But without Duffy, that game was not going to be possible. And after we did win, obviously this is before 9/11, there were 10 to 15,000 people when the plane landed running onto the tarmac. The plane, once it stopped at the end of the runway, couldn't go any further because there were 10 to 15,000 people around the airplane. That's how big a deal that game was. And we got the headlines in the New York Times. I still have that. So it was a really big deal and a great game for Houston, and it kind of catapulted us into the limelight nationally as opposed to just statewide. So
yeah,
Dad was always appreciative of Duffy giving us the chance to have the game.
yeah. And then eventually Houston joined the Southwest Conference and won the title the first year. That's right. Right, Bill?
That's correct.
First
yeah.
year of membership, beat Texas and Texas A&M
1976.
and all those teams. He recruited Andre Ware, who went on and won the Heisman, right?
Correct. Yes. Great guy.
Yeah.
Just a superb individual.
And of course, Houston has honored your dad with a statue at the new stadium. and what a great honor that is. But I've talked about this with you before, Bill, that how embarrassed your dad would feel that Houston has a statue of your dad. Nebraska has a statue of Bob Devaney. Notre Dame has a statue of Dan Devine. Arizona State has a statue of Frank Kush. And Michigan State doesn't have a statue. Duffy Doherty.
I don't know why there isn't a statue of Duffy. Now, they named the football building after him, which is a really nice building. But I agree with you. There should be a statue to Duffy outside of that building. And it would be a very endearing statue. Duffy was just a fun individual.
And responsible for so much. It's just an example that Michigan State doesn't understand its own history.
I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of schools like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's bring this home. Herman, talk about properly honoring legends. I should get your comment on that.
Well, it's definitely important because from our history, right, we understand and we learn the right things to do. We learn perhaps wrong decisions that have been made. And in terms of legends and things that we do in the military, to honor those people who have come before us, who have done great things. And many men and women have given their life, their limbs, in order to earn a little medal, which means so much. And that's why we think of the Medal of Honor in the military. Those people are our legends. And as we think of in the sports world, I think I can remember, I guess you remember when the Miami, I guess the bowl game they came to and in fatigues and said, this is war and we're going to do all that. And of course they got chastised from that because in essence, it minimized, what real war is, where people are putting their lives on the line. But heroes and legends are important. We should show them the appropriate respect and admiration so that others can follow in their path.
Yeah. Okay. Final comments from Bill on how proud you are of your dad and what he accomplished at Houston. And then Herman, bring us home.
Well, as a father, he was wonderful. It's amazing how many opportunities he gave me just by being the person that he was. I ran for office. I was a judge in Harris County for 32 years, and I only got elected because of his name. I'm hoping that some things that I did got me reelected, but I wouldn't have been initially elected without the status of his name. I need to include my mother because they were a team. My mom did everything that she needed to do to allow him to be successful. And to her goes most of the credit. But he understood what the job was. He understood what needed to be done and how to go about it. And he did just that. So I am thrilled to be his son. And you could see a lot of the West Point training and how he had to handle some of the circumstances that arose in the background about some of the decisions he made to go forward with integration. So he loved West Point. He loved Duffy Doherty. He loved Red Blake. And those are the three passions that he had. And he wouldn't want to be anywhere else but the University of Houston. So he had a great career and a great life.
Well,
Herman, talk about these giants.
Bill, I can tell you, I feel like I'm touching a legend, through you to your father. I've been a sports junkie for a long time, as I said before, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. And it's just, for me, it's a labor of love working with Tom, and Tom, just for you bringing, I won't call them controversial, but I'll call them topical issues to bear for the sports listener, I think is fantastic. I'm proud to be your partner on this podcast and look forward to doing any more. So Bill, I hope we'll exchange some information, and I come to Houston. I'm on a board out there. Where do you live now? So our fans will know.
I live in Cypress, which is just northwest Houston. So that'll be great. Let's do that.
We'll
I'm sure Tom has all the information, so you can just text that or email it to me.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
love to get together if you ever get into town.
Okay.
Yeah. and
So to
hopefully-
both of you, thank you for this opportunity. I don't get it often, so I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for watching the end game and learning a little bit more about the true pioneers of college football integration in the 1960s. Nobody was wearing an Alabama uniform, a USC uniform, or a houndstooth hat. All of it took place in the 60s. Thanks for watching.